My name's Lawrence Lewis. I'm the founder of One Feather. I'm a member of the Wee-Way-Kay Nation here on the west coast of British Columbia. My Indian name is Kalis, and I've really had the good fortune of working with Indigenous communities and governments my whole career. I think of truth and reconciliation in the context of the work that we do as a place and space where we can make some impact and really kind of advance truth and reconciliation from an Indigenous perspective and actually own that process, if you like, or help guide it through. And so I think of it in the context always as sovereignty. And what I mean by that is Indigenous sovereignty, First Nation Indigenous sovereignty, and individual First Nations Indigenous sovereignty. And really what that means from a more kind of practical or layman's kind of perspective is that Indigenous people continue, have their sovereignty over the lands that were taken away. So what that means is those unceded territories and lands are returned. Those resources and treasures that were stolen as a result of colonialization and the actions of government to kind of decimate it, if you like, and wipe away Indigenous folks are reconciled and returned to Indigenous folks. And that in a modern context that we have the ability and the resources to kind of lead, if you like, Indigenous folks into the next and future generations. So things we could never have imagined as impacting our Indigenous identity are front and center. So that digital, the digital space, for example, how are Indigenous people defining and designing their interface with digital technologies and using them to build stronger and better communities and healthier communities and allow language and culture and social values to survive and thrive. How are we taking some ownership of that, and how are we able to, given the resources and the access to do that? Because if we don't, then someone else will define what that looks like, and that's just a further extension of the history, if you like, in Canada, of colonialism and the impacts of all the harshness of that history with Canada. Is just it's perpetuating just through a different kind of perspective. And so as a digital technology company, as an Indigenous technology company, it means that we are defining and driving and designing what that digital interface looks like from an Indigenous perspective and that shared lived experience, so that it matters to us, it's relevant to us, and it's something that we can use to build stronger communities, not tear them apart. So it should just give everyone a moment of pause to kind of reflect and take stock of Canada's history and the legacies of its actions and activities, either designed or by accident, that have really, for the most part, largely impacted Indigenous people and communities in a very negative and very profoundly bad ways. Residential school atrocities, the thievery of Indigenous lands, the deliberate acts of government to, cause genocide and decimate Indigenous folks. These are real historical facts, and sadly is some of the legacy that Canada has with Indigenous people in this country. I think Indigenous folks, from my experience and from my understanding, aside from the hurt and the trauma, are quite prepared to kind of move forward to a better place and space in their relationship with Canada and the rest of the citizens of Canada. And I think for that to happen in a good and healthy way, there has to be a moment of pause, of reflection and acceptance, tolerance, and a recognition of what's happened. If it can't be recognized, if we can't speak truth to those events and to those acts, we can't design our way out of this out of those kind of horrible things, and it'll be just more of the same. So I think, what does it represent? It's a moment to pause and reflect on that factual history, and recognize that Indigenous folks have a very special place in this country, what we call Canada. And there are legacies there that need to be righted. There are histories there that need to be taught. And there is a path forward that needs to be designed with Indigenous folks, not for Indigenous folks. And so hopefully, what this represents is a start of a collaborative process where we do this together, as opposed to one that has historically been, we're going to do this for you and look after you, be patient. And what we've learned is that that's never the case, and it just causes more harm than good. Every Indigenous person will have their way of dealing with this, and some folks, will come from a place of real pain and trauma and suffering, and for those folks, I think, we'd just be well advised to recognize that, and where appropriate, and where appropriate, really just give a hug and say thank you, or just recognize what's happened there. For others, I guess for each of us, it's going to be, we're going to figure out what that looks like for each of us. So to be present, to participate where we can, and for a company like One Feather, and for myself, just to to continue to double down on what we do and why it's important. So from my perspective, it's just about doing the work to continue on, designing digital solutions and technologies that redefine that Indigenous experience, and from an Indigenous agenda and perspective, advance what reconciliation looks like in today's day and age through that Indigenous digital lens, if you like. For others, it's really going to be up to them to decide how they participate, and what feels good, and what's appropriate, and what they're ready to do. For some, not much. For others, it'll be a very active and celebratory week. So it's going to be quite a continuum, and I wouldn't assume to know what all of us should be doing. I think we do what we can, where we can, when we're ready. What I'm inspired by in terms of our team is this, for our Indigenous, or for our non-Indigenous team members, this real drive and desire to understand that legacy, and as an act of, what I see as real reconciliation is that individual human approach, and desire to understand that legacy and that history, and to take steps to better understand it. So take courses, participate in conversations, actively, acknowledge the truth of Canada's history with Indigenous folks, and make sure that that's front and center in the decisions they make and the actions they take, particularly as it reflects One Feather and how we serve Indigenous communities. So I see acts of reconciliation with our team every day, from our non-Indigenous folks and from our Indigenous staff, and embrace of that, to do that together and support each other where we can. So, very fortunate inside of One Feather, I think, to be seeing active reconciliation on a very regular basis, and just see folks really dedicated to making a change, and honoring Indigenous people and their place in this country through the work that we do. As an Indigenous person, and One Feather as an Indigenous, company, our work really must align with the vision of truth and reconciliation. And so, what that means is that we start everything through discovery or design from a place of understanding the diversity of Indigenous people in this country, the legacies of colonialization in residential schools, the shared lived experience, and seeing things through an Indigenous lens, and making sure that those elements define the work that we do. We're going to get it right sometimes, and we're going to get it wrong sometimes. And I think it's okay to get it wrong, as long as that work is done from a place of, of love and of passion and of real good intent. But so if we do get it wrong, let's recognize that we got it wrong, and let's pivot and rework it to see if we can get it right or get it better. The challenge with, and the opportunity, if you like, with so many diverse Indigenous groups and communities, and nations across the country, is that it's not this homogeneous kind of group of folks. It's not this melting pot where everyone is Indigenous and it looks like this. We see a diversity there, and so what we're focused on as part of this, as I think, as a current vision, or as a active vision of what truth and reconciliation looks like is to look backward and look behind us, look to the past, and understand the impacts of all things. And then as we shift our gaze to look forward and we see what's coming, and again, I just reflect on this kind of digital space. There are things here that our ancestors and our aunties and uncles couldn't even have imagined would be coming. And so we can see these things fast approaching. Sometimes, in fact, some of them are right with us or even a little bit behind us. How do we interface with that space and make sure that what we are doing builds stronger communities, helps bring community together, helps bring communities together, help lift our people up, and aren't technologies that we don't want to be guilty of the same kind of history, that we don't want to create technologies and services and scope that either by accident or design has only contributed to the further impacts of colonialization or the deconstruction, if you like, of Indigenous communities and identity and those values and those principles. And so our work is challenging in that respect because things are evolving and happening so quickly. So how do we do that? And we just work hard. We just do the heavy lifting, and we look to make sure that we get that feedback loop with the folks we engage with, so that we get it right more often than we get it wrong. And where we do get it wrong, we own that and we make a shift and we work to make it better. And I think that's really what truth and reconciliation is that none of us are perfect. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to get some things wrong or right along the way. And I think the real kind of impact, if you like, of that is where we do get it wrong, that we quickly shift and re-engage with Indigenous folks to try and make it better or to get it better. And so I'm very kind of honored to be doing the work that we do in that respect. Where we are today looks so much better than where we were 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or even 100 years ago, as these kinds of things were being levied on top of us. And I'm hopeful, and I really believe and trust that years from now, we will look back at these moments as pivotal times in our history where the right things were done, the truth was spoken, real reconciliation took place, and that we have used this opportunity to build more and more opportunities for success and closure of these histories with Canada, and opened up all kinds of new doors to expand opportunities in terms of our relationship and how we share this space, how we use our shared values and principles and cultures and social capital and social license and all those things we're passionate about, with the environment, for example, where we have been really able to get to a place where there's some synergy there and some real action, if you like, that benefits not just Indigenous folks, but all the people of Canada, and in fact, those relationships around the world. So what would I say about today? Today is a good day. Let's make tomorrow a little bit better. Let's not forget what happened yesterday, because it helps define how we see the world, and it helps us prioritize what actions we take next. But always be looking forward in a positive and a hopeful way. Hope is what matters here, and I think we've been inspired by our Indigenous leaders and our elders and our ancestors to stay hopeful and build bridges and work through these things, do the heavy lifting, so that we're all in a better place tomorrow than we were today. And in our culture, in my culture, we leave the table more bountiful than the way we found it. And I think that's just a really important thing to always keep in mind. Leave this space better than you found it. And this Truth and Reconciliation Day or week, if you like, is exactly that. A whole bunch of people did a whole bunch of heavy lifting to leave the day better than the way they found it. And I think we should all be inspired to do the same thing every single day.